Welcome to another episode of Mindful Musicians with Nancy Schleier. Today we have on Dr. Jud Brewer. If you are interested in following him, his Instagram handle is at dr.jud. And that's for Instagram. And then his website is drjud.com, drjud.com. So welcome, Dr. Brewer. Thank you so much for being on today.
Thanks for having me.
So Jud, just tell us a little bit about yourself.
I am an addiction psychiatrist and a neuroscientist. I'm a professor at Brown University. And also, I've been playing the violin since I was 5 years old. Was in a semi-professional quartet since high school all the way through grad school, which helped pay the bills in grad school. And so I'm a big fan of music and musician myself.
So I know I have been watching your videos and reading up online about everything that you've been working on. I know you have a lot of work dealing with anxiety. And so specifically today, I want to talk about how those two worlds collide and tend to interact with each other. So tell us a little bit about your research about what you've discovered about anxiety.
I'd be happy to. So, as a psychiatrist, I've really struggled to help my patients with anxiety. And a lot of that has to do with medications can work for some people, but certainly aren't for everyone. About 1 in 5 people shows a significant reduction in symptoms when they take the best medications out there. So, I get anxious when trying to help my patients with anxiety. The other thing I would say is I've been developing habit change programs. Sorry, I have a cat who is very excited about this conversation. So Samson can join us in the conversation. All right. My lab at Brown studies habit change, and we've been finding that we can use mindfulness training to help people break bad habits. Like we've gotten 5 times the quit rates of gold standard treatment in one study. We have an eating app called Eat Right Now, where we got a 40% reduction in craving related eating. And this is now the first CDC recognized app for diabetes prevention program that uses mindfulness as its mainstay treatment. And we've even developed an app called Unwinding Anxiety, where we've gotten a 67% reduction in clinically validated anxiety scores in people with generalized anxiety disorder. So I've done a lot of research with anxiety, and I can also say that I have a lot of personal experience with anxiety, not only anxiety helping my patients with anxiety, but I've had panic attacks myself. I used to get them in residency. So very personally experienced with anxiety. And I wrote an entire book on anxiety called Unwinding Anxiety. And part of what I talk about in the book is that I never learned in medical school or residency that anxiety can actually be driven like a habit. What I mean by that is any habit needs 3 elements to form: a trigger, a behavior, and a result. And with the anxiety, the feeling of anxiety can trigger the mental behavior of worrying, which then results in us feeling like we're in control, or at least that we're doing something. And that's rewarding enough to feed back to our brain to say, hey, next time you're anxious, you should worry. And so we get stuck in these worry habit loops. On top of that, there's this whole myth that was perpetuated on the internet about performance anxiety. And boy, I've had a lot of experience, whether it was my recitals or my quartet giving a recital or playing for a competition or something like that, where, boy, it's pretty anxiety provoking to stand up there, especially if it's after the person that went right before you and they just crushed their audition. And I'm like, boy, how am I going to be half as good as that? So there's this whole myth about performance anxiety that we need to have some anxiety to perform well. And that's a complete myth. There's no evidence to support that. So I'll pause there. I just want to, because I just said a lot. And before we go on, does all of that make sense?
That all makes sense to me. That's really interesting that you've noticed that there is this anxiety around performing, but that you don't need it to perform. I thought that's really interesting for me.
And it may be the case because a lot of people, that's all they feel before they perform, and they don't know that there are alternatives, such as not being anxious. But then the time that they don't feel anxious before they perform and when they perform, they might realize, oh, wait, there's another way. I have to say, my favorite type of music is playing chamber music. I love playing quartets. It is absolutely my favorite. And there's something about getting up there and just getting into the music with my quartet where I lose a sense of self, where it's just, I'm not worried about how I'm playing. I'm just in the music and we're all in the music and there's this group flow that happens. And that is the farthest from anxiety that anybody gets. That's actually a corollary that suggests that we don't have to be anxious to perform well, because when we're in flow, when we're in groove flow, we completely lose a sense of self. So there's nobody there even to be anxious. I remember my orchestra was on tour one year. This is in college, and we were playing at the Royal Academy of Music in London. And I think that was that performance site, and we were playing Rachmaninoff's Second Symphony. And in the slow movement, we were all just so in sync. It was afterwards, we're like, whoa, what happened? It was amazing. We'd performed enough that we just knew the piece really well. And we were just in this wonderful venue, and we were just all completely in sync. I still get hair standing on my arms just thinking about it. And this was 20 years ago. So that is great proof that we don't need to be anxious to perform well.
So, what causes that anxiety? What causes people to be anxious when they're performing? And then I guess the flip side of that is, how do they not be anxious? So can you talk about that?
I'm not going to spend a lot of time on what causes us to be anxious, because that actually leads us down a rabbit hole of, oh, if I could just figure out what caused it, then I can stop, I can avoid it, which is a rabbit hole. I think of this as the why habit loop. I write about that in my Unwinding Anxiety book a lot. I also write about the performance anxiety piece, which we don't have time to get into, but just as a hint, that myth, which is called the Yerkes-Dodson law, was based on a 1908 study of Japanese dancing mice. They weren't dancing mice in terms of performing mice. This is just a strain of mice that they were studying. So how that got into this myth of the inverted U-shaped curve of performance anxiety, where no anxiety is not helpful and you need to have some level of anxiety, like the Goldilocks phenomenon of anxiety to perform, that is not true. Don't have time to go into all of the research. But what this suggests is that, yes, we don't have to be anxious to perform. Flow is a great example of that. If you look at any musician giving a really great performance, they don't look anxious because they probably aren't. So how do we get out of that? How do we get out of those anxiety loops, especially in the pre-performance stage? Because often when we're in the middle of performing and we're really getting into the music, it's easier to lose a sense of self because the music is so powerful. That I just have to say, yes, that's the beauty of music. That's the power of music. That's probably why a lot of us play music, because it's amazing and it helps us get out of our own way. But that also hints at how we can do that, where if we identify the behavior, the worrying is the primary behavior related to anxiety, we can start to see, oh, is this worrying actually helping me? Is it making me perform better? No, it's not actually. We call this correlation does not equal causation. If I'm anxious and I perform well, it doesn't mean the anxiety caused me to perform well. So what happens when I'm not anxious? Oh, I perform better. That's something that anybody can explore and start to notice, oh, is this worrying helping me? No, it's not. I talk about this, the neuroscience behind this in my book, and not trying to say, hey, everybody should read my book. But the idea here is that if something's rewarding, we're going to keep doing it. If it's not rewarding, we're going to stop. And it's not about telling ourselves to stop being anxious. That doesn't work. It's really about seeing, what am I truly getting from anxiety? What am I truly getting from worrying? Is the worrying helping me or not? No, worry tends to make us more anxious. So if we can notice that, we become less excited and we can let go of that belief that worrying actually makes us perform better. And then we can step into what is actually better. I call this finding the BBO, the bigger, better offer. And here, the bigger, better offer is curiosity. I actually co-wrote a paper with somebody, it was a couple of years ago, where we actually wrote about performance and mindfulness as helping with musical performance. This is a Juilliard trained musician. And we talked about how curiosity is a key aspect to helping us step out of these worry habit loops and into the present moment. So, for example, when we're feeling anxious, we can go, oh no, how am I going to perform well? Or, oh no, am I going to be anxious all day? Or we can turn toward that anxiety and get curious and go, oh, what does this feel like in my body? And that helps us move from this closed down, contracted state of anxiety to this opened up state of curiosity. And because curiosity feels better than worry, our brain is going to pick that bigger, better offer. It says, hey, I'd rather be curious than worry. It just takes a little bit of training, but it's not about forcing ourselves to be curious. It's about just noticing, oh, curiosity feels pretty good.
I notice for me that when I start to feel anxious, If I lean into the adrenaline more, I find that when I go, okay, my heart is racing, my body is feeling hot, and I can either go down the fear route or that fight route. What are your thoughts on that?
So we can certainly ride that energy, right? So if there's energy happening in our body, like you're saying, we can go down the fear route, oh no, tends to lead us in the wrong direction. Or we can ride that energy and go, oh, now I don't know about you, but I've never learned from my teachers that we should fight our instrument. There, I would say we can explore how best to ride that energy. So, can we ride that energy in a way that is skillful, that helps us really flow, right? Be loose, be responsive, and literally let the music flow as compared to fighting with it.
So you've mentioned flow a couple times. Can you just talk to us about what that is?
I'd be happy to.
Yeah.
There's a psychologist named Mihai Csikszentmihalyi who coined this term flow, geez, 30 years ago maybe. And he talks about it being a state that's effortless, that's selfless, it's timeless, it's fully very energized. We feel very energized in the moment. So basically, we're so out of our own way that we forget that we're even there. He talks about it being action is merged with outcome, or we're merged with what's happening. The idea that he talks about is that if something is too easy, then we can't be in flow. And if something's too hard, we can't be in flow. So there's a Goldilocks band where when there's something just challenging enough that it keeps our attention, but not so challenging that we're frustrated with it, that's how we can get into flow. And so if you think about it, learning a new piece, hard to get into flow when we're just getting the finger movements down or just getting the bowing down or, as a violinist or whatever, just getting it down. And if it's too easy, our mind might wander and we might forget where we are or we might miss something. So here, if we're truly in something where it's like just hard enough, but not too hard, that creates the conditions for our minds to be very relaxed and open, but not so relaxed that our minds wander off to something else.
So, how do we do that? How do we get into these mental states where we're able to use that energy, where we're able to get back into that flow versus getting so anxious and getting all wrapped up in our brains and like freaking out? How do we get from that into the flow?
Yes. So one thing that you're highlighting is that when we're anxious, we're in the opposite direction of flow. So the thing I would say first is we cannot force flow. So I'm going to repeat that so people really get that in. The more you try to get to flow, the more it's going to run away from you. It's like this very exotic animal that we can't go running after because it's going to scare it away, but we can invite the space for it to come. It's like opening our hands and just resting there and letting that animal come. I like that image because flow is about being open. And so we think of anxiety as feeling closed and contracted. Flow is the opposite, where we're so open, we lose that sense of self. We lose us in the process of music making. That can give us some clues as to how to help support conditions that can create flow. One of the things that we can practice all the time, it's not just while playing music or practicing, it's all the time, is practicing curiosity, because curiosity helps us open to our situation. If we're feeling anxious and worried, we can, instead of going, oh no, where we contract around that, we can go, oh, what's this feel like? Or if somebody's talking to us, instead of saying, oh, that's a bad idea, we can go, oh, I wonder. And we can practice really feeling into the space of curiosity so that we know what that feels like and that we invite it to come up more and more. So when we're playing music, our body and minds are used to that space of openness. And the other nice thing about that is I would suggest that music is a flow inducer itself, right? That's one of the beauties of music. So when we really are creating those conditions for us to get out of our own way, music's going to come in and say, follow me to flow, right? And how many times have we heard, just let the music flow, let the music flow, let the music flow? It's already there.
If I'm sitting and I'm frustrated or something, especially when I was a teenager, I've always found myself going and I would play these songs that I had worked really hard on, but that I could play and that kept my attention. And I did. I felt a lot of that anxiety and that stress like falling away as I would play. So, what are some mindfulness practices or techniques, including, of course, being curious and wanting to learn about what we're feeling and asking ourselves those questions. What are some other techniques that students can use or that people can use to help us ground ourselves, get out of our own heads, and start to get into that flow?
I'm not sure there's anything better than just practicing curiosity. So I'm not actually going to suggest anything else. I'm going to suggest number one, number two, number three, curiosity. And if somebody's not feeling curious, they can get curious about what not feeling curious feels like, because that induces curiosity. So curiosity, full stop.
Is curiosity mindfulness?
There are lots of definitions of mindfulness, but I think of it as having two key components. One is awareness, and one is an attitude of curiosity. When you're curious, you're aware. So I think of you can really distill it down to those being two sides of the same coin. That's how I like to operationally define mindfulness, is it's this curious awareness.
What can students do in their practice rooms to keep being curious? And is there something that people can do to minimize anxiety? I know we've said curiosity, and you're like,
Yeah.
no, curiosity, that's it. But is there anything that people can do to prepare when they're in that state? Because a lot of times you get in that state and it's almost like rational thought just like is gone.
Yes, and this isn't about rational thought. If we could think our way out of anxiety, then we'd do it. It's just not how our brains work. I would say if somebody's really anxious, has a lot of anxiety, that's why we created this unwinding anxiety app so they could check that out if they really want some systematic training in working with anxiety. But if somebody's in the practice room, here I would say anytime that they start to notice anxiety or frustration come up, they can take a moment to take a beat and just stop and get curious. Oh, what does this feel like? Instead of getting sucked into that a spiral or black hole even of anxiety, like, oh no, I'm not going to be able to learn this passage, or oh no, I'm not going to be good enough. The oh no's can be bells or signals that say, hey, take a beat, check in with your body, notice what this feels like, get curious about what this feels like. And it's like this car that's starting to swerve off the road. Oh, that helps us take our foot off the gas instead of hitting the accelerator, and then steer that car back onto the road.
So just taking that step back, getting curious. Do you recommend modeling or trying to model that performance situation or anything like that?
Nope. I'm not saying don't do that. Folks can talk to their teachers about the best way to do these things. All I'm saying is I can't think of any teacher that would say, stop being curious. So this should fit with any type of lessons or any types of coaching that students are getting from teachers. This should be consistent with all of it.
Is there any last minute thoughts or things that you want to share or
I'll add one thing, and this is really important, which is stay curious.
that's a good one to end on. All right. Thank you so much. This has been Dr. Jed Brewer. A reminder, his Instagram is at dr.jud. And his website is drjud.com. And obviously, you've heard about his app, Unwinding Anxiety, and his book, Unwinding Anxiety. I've looked over both of those. Thank you so much for coming on and sharing with us to be curious about your anxieties, be curious about what's going on. And thank you so much for that.
My pleasure. And I hope folks can just really, with that curiosity, it can remind us why we play music, which is because it's really joyful and fun.
Yes. When I enjoy music the most is when I'm having fun.
Yes.
So thank you so much, and everybody have a great day.